Hi, everyone. So this is my second talk today, my third talk at the Airflow Summit. So now I know the drill. I'm ready for it. And this one I'm really excited about. Today I'm talking about advanced Apache Superset for data engineers. Apache Superset, I'll do a demo and kind of go through this and get to the agenda. Before that, I'm going to introduce myself. So this is the same slide I used earlier this week at the keynote. But I'll essentially repeat very quickly and go through this. So my name is Max. I have just this passion for building data tools. So I started Apache Airflow back in 2014 while at Airbnb. I started Apache Superset just a little bit less than a year after. Originally that was a hackathon project. That was a 3-day hackathon at Airbnb. And more recently, so about a year and a half ago, excuse me, I started a company called Preset at preset.io. And Preset is a company that builds in and around Apache Superset. We have a hosted offering of Apache Superset, and we're doing all sorts of things around this space and analytics, and some of which I'll cover today. Cool. So the agenda for today. So I wanted to get into kind of deeper Apache Superset and show some more advanced features and things that data engineers or programmers can take advantage of. So first, I'm going to do an overview, quick overview and demo of Superset. So I think probably a lot of you guys have seen Superset already, but I'll do a very quick, like 5 minutes, just to show briefly what it looks like, what it does, and with a little bit more focus on the SQL IDE that we call SQL Lab. So I'll focus on that and some more advanced use cases for data engineers. I will then talk about a feature that's not super well documented. It is documented, but it's behind a feature flag and it's not there by default. That is around scheduling queries. So there's a way that you can schedule your queries in Superset and get Airflow to pick up those queries and schedule them and run them and weave them into DAGs. And it's pretty configurable, so you can kind of make it work with the specificities of your environment. We'll get into that. And then I'll give a few pointers as to how to build visualization plugins. So the Superset platform is extensible, and you can write your own visualization. It's a little bit involved, but I'll show you how it works. And that stuff is very well done now and well documented. So I'll mostly just give pointers today and show you what's possible. And the last item is I'll do a very quick demo of how we can build charts and dashboard dynamically. So we have a REST API, and there's other ways to do it in Superset using the SQL Alchemy layer as well. So I'll give you kind of an overview of how you can build charts dynamically. So I think many of these things kind of relate to the kind of work that data engineers might want to do, and some of them more directly, relate to Airflow, like the scheduling feature, the SQL IDE kind of power features, and building charts and dashboard is something that you could think you would do too as part of more advanced data pipeline use cases, right? You could have a data pipeline that would prepare custom dashboards or charts and drop them in some places. Cool. So I'm going to pivot into the demo. So I have not prepared a lot. So I'm going to kind of wing this demo and just hoping that everything's going to go well. I'm running off of my local here. So here, what I'm going to do is just show you a few things. So Superset is mostly 3 applications kind of into one, or 3 main kind of vertical products inside of one. The first one is the dashboard. So here I'll pop a handful of dashboard that I'll show you just to give you an idea of the kind of dashboards that you can build in a Superset. And here you see just a very simple dashboard that has data of baby birth names in the US. I'll show you very quickly the dashboard editor. So as you pivot into this edit mode, this is where you can come and add components like tabs. rows, headers marked down, right? So you can kind of integrate the things that you want and edit them and compose your dashboard however you'd like. Now I'll show you, I'll close this window and go to another dashboard right here. Looks like my laptop is slow. I don't know what's dragging the CPU. Luckily, might just be able to go here and see what's going on. Here, all right, good. So I wanted to leave this here. All right, cool. So we're back. Excellent. So, and I hear the CPU fan on my laptop, so I think it might be the software, the streaming software here. Cool. So I'll show you a few things. So here we have also like these interactive controls here where you can kind of apply filter to the dashboard. We also have here. I'll show you some of the more fancy visualization with using a library called DeckGL here. So here we integrated while I worked at Lyft and working with a team there at Lyft. We integrated some more geospatial type visualization and some more advanced features. So that shows you some of the features here. I'm going to close some windows and then I will pivot into a second part of the app here. Excuse me. All right, so this app here is the Explorer, the place where you can go to slice and dice the data further. So here you have a pointer to your table. This is where you would pivot to different type of visualizations. For instance, so I might be interested in going to an area chart instead of a line chart. I might want to, instead of grouping by country, I might be interested in grouping by region. So basic type of interactions. You can also adjust some of the more visual attribute of the visualization as to like whether you want, for instance, to use a log scale in place of a normal scale. It looks like for the area chart, that feature doesn't work. Cool. So here I wanted to show too that you can kind of browse the SQL that's generated by Superset to get to the data. You can look at the results, you can look at the properties of the charts, but I'm going to stay shallow here and not do too deep of a dive into some of these features. Now I'll pivot into SQL Lab, which we're going to do a slightly deeper dive into today. So some of the things that are interesting about SQL Lab, one is that we support templating, and that this templating is compatible, it uses the same templating engine as Airflow, which is Jinja 2. So here it's possible to take queries that are arbitrarily complex and to set to parameterize them using some JSON. So I'm going to show you some example of that. Before I jump into this, I wanted to show just a little bit that we have an object browser here where you can kind of see your tables and browse their schemas. So I think if I get into, let's see, some of these tables, if they have, it will surface the metadata, the index, and that sort of thing. So it's a pretty advanced SQL IDE where you can write arbitrarily complex query. It's also possible to select kind of subsection of the SQL and only run the selection, which is pretty useful when you have a collection kind of workbook with a lot of queries. What I wanted to show now is a few more advanced features around templating. So here, maybe I'm going to make things a little bit bigger, not too big, for the sake of people, make sure everyone can see what I'm doing here. It makes the UI look a little bit bloated, but people are going to be able to see a little better, so that's good. So here, what do we have? So we have a very simple query that's just a select. There's no from, and I've set a variable, and it's pretty easy for me to go and set other things. I could say hello world, and now that adds the second parameter here. So now I should be able to add the variable that I added, which was called hello. And I should say world here. So now we have a collection of things that have been defined here. there's just a string that's been defined just in normal SQL, and then we have some Jinja templating that shows the variable pi and the variable hello. And the question is like, where is this say hello coming from? So one of the feature I wanted to show here as I pivot into my terminal is that here is my superset config file. So let's see. So in this superset config file, goodness, I've got some issues. I've got a lag on my terminal. My laptop is suffering. I don't know what's going on. It's just a little slow. Good. All right. All right, so here what I wanted to show is this little section here that I'm highlighting as I talk. So there's a lambda that's defined here that's called say hello, and it just does something extremely simple, which is just saying hello. Here, you could easily add another lambda that would do something different. So why is that interesting? It's because in your environment, you'll be able to define things that are specific to that might be interesting to you depending on your needs and depending on what you do in your pipelines, right? So the fact that the queries that you might bring into like in and out of Airflow here use the same templating engine makes it kind of easy to test your things, to work in a more interactive place and to go back and forth. Cool, so back into my presentation. So that was the very quick demo and overview and deeper dive into SQL Lab. And this is what I just showed you, that you can, in your superset config, that's an environment configuration variable, define your own set of functions. And now I'm going to talk about scheduling queries. And that feature has been behind a feature flag, has been used at Lyft for a while. It's somewhat experimental, but it works well. I tested it before jumping into this demo briefly last night, and it works very well. So I'm going to show you today what it's all about. So this feature was contributed by a committer named Beto that I worked with at Lyft in the past. And it adds this section here that I'm highlighting in the red square. It adds a button that says schedule queries. And this is to satisfy the use case of like a lot of analysts might just craft some queries. They don't necessarily want to work with source control or author their own DAGs. Sometimes you just want to have people go out there and schedule a query. And you can do that fairly easily with Superset. So I'll show you how it works and how to configure that. And it's highly configurable, which is kind of interesting. So in the documentation, so at this location here, and I'll share the links and the slides after the talk, you'll see that it's well documented. So if I click this link, it's going to pop in my browser. And this is from the superset.apache.org documentation, right? And this everything that I'm going to talk about today is very well documented there. Thanks, Beto, for documenting your work. This is great. And what you'll see is that you can define a JSON schema, which in turns define the form that's going to pop inside Superset. So let me just show you the form here. So when you click Schedule Query, it will pop this form that you can fill in, and this form is defined by you as the administrator of the system, or the person who sets this up using this feature flag can define exactly how this feature is going to behave. So here we say we want a title, we want a description, we want a collection of objects, and we want for people to define the output table, the start date, the end date for the pipeline, the schedule interval, as well as the dependencies, right? And in your environment, you might want to define the rules in a slightly different ways. You might want to allow people to schedule only at certain intervals, or to force a certain length, to say like maybe only people can only schedule queries to operate for a certain number of days. Kind of more like the idea of a lease on a query, so you don't have all these queries that are scheduled and will run forever in your system. So you define your rules, you define what goes in this form, In the context of Lyft here, we had defined this idea of some URIs that people knew how to use. And it could be something like, hey, I want to wait on Presto. I want to wait on Hive. So for these dependencies, it's an alternate way. In this case, at Lyft, we decided to go with a certain scheme and a certain pattern, which may work or not work for you. And the thing that's kind of that you have to wrap your head around is that in this particular case, Superset does not do the scheduling. It relies on another scheduling engine to do the scheduling. So let me just add this here. So I'm going to add a quick description. And I'm going to say like this is the output table. So this would be the table that this would go into. And schedule interval might be daily. I'm going to add a dependency on this Hive table and say submit. Nice. So this has been saved. And if I go into my save query here, you'll see that this is the one that I just saved. I'll delete the other one that was there from previous tests before. And there is a documented API endpoint here that you can hit to see the list of queries. So this section here of this API endpoint is the exact metadata that's been defined dynamically in that form. So that means now we can get Airflow, an Airflow DAG that will call this endpoint, say we'll call Superset, authenticate against it, and say, hello, I'm Airflow. I would like to get the list of all the queries that I need to schedule. And they will receive an object with this definition and process that object and schedule the queries. So it doesn't have to be Airflow. It could be something else. It could be any other type of subsystem that can call an API and generate tasks. Cool. So back to the presentation here. It's also possible with these JSON schema to do some sort of validation on the form. It's possible to weave in some documentation so you can exactly tell people what they can and cannot do using these forms. So that was my second feature or so here. And here are screenshots in case my laptop would struggle like it did earlier. Next feature I'm going to talk about is this idea of building your own visualization plugins. And what does that mean? That means that anyone in Superset today that has a little bit of time on their hand and a fair amount of will can come here and create their own visualization. So here I created two, one called Timeline, one called Hello World, which is kind of the default that comes in the examples. And this is the one we're going to play with now, the one called Hello World. So where do I start? Back to the slides here, and I'll hit play again. So recently, very recently, so less than a week ago, Evan from Preset published this blog post, which explains exactly in great details how to build a new visualization for Superset. Over the past, I would say 6 months or so, there's been a lot of work done in Superset to make the plugin engine work very well. So we had to essentially create the interface for the plugins and make all the visualization that existed instead of being kind of tightly coupled visualizations that they were as part of the framework, to cut them out and make them plugins too, so that every visualization in Superset is a plugin. And now I'm going to go a little bit into this blog post and kind of walk you through it. So if you come to, so this is our website, preset.io. Under resources, there's a blog, and this is the blog post I'm talking about. We'll share that one in the notes, and I'm sure you can find it pretty easily too. So here, Evan walks you in great detail as to how to go step by step to create your visualization, from setting up your Superset environment all the way to generating a template. So we use this thing called Yeoman that is a template generator engine, and walks you through step by step to create the set of templates. So you follow these instructions, And you get to a place where you have a new repository, a new folder with a visualization that's this very basic hello world visualization that I have set up. So it's a few steps, and I've done these steps. I can show you what it looks like. So if I go back to, let me close some windows here. All right. So yeah, so if I pivot to using one of these, I will go to use the hello world one, and I will run the query. So it comes empty with really just something that says hello world and shows the data. So it comes already kind of preloaded. I'm hoping my setup's going to work a little bit better now. So here I wanted to go into the hello world file and show you that this template that's been generated by the template generator is loaded with instructions and comments that explain what every line of code here, or every section of the code does. And it renders something really, really simple, which is this thing here. And what we're looking at here is this section. So I can show you very, very quickly that, I don't know, I can add a new thing here that will say, I don't know, hello Airflow Summit, save it, and essentially wait a second and refresh the page, and we're going to see the what I added here. The thing that's really interesting about that is that, so this is what I just added here. The template here comes fully loaded with, well, it comes loaded at the beginning with a certain set of controls that you can easily kind of expand and augment, right? So here, there's an example that shows like, oh, here there's a checkbox that says bold text, and it's attached somehow just to show the mechanics of how it works. I'm sure here if I look for bold text, it's attached to this prop that is passed through the controls. And it should be really easy for anyone to just come here, or for anyone that knows a little bit of JavaScript, and to add the controls that they want to kind of mutate this starting point, this sandbox or the template, into a much more complex data visualization. Right, so from this point, you can do something like import a data visualization library inside your plugin, and use it and connect it together. So you could get something like D3, or get something like some sort of React visualization and bind it to your data pretty easily. So what I wanted to show here is this file is where the controls are defined. So I just wanted to show very easily here. I had commented this extra checkbox here that I called a new checkbox. And as soon as I reload this here, we should have a new text box that's going to show up in this control panel right here. It just shows you that it becomes almost like a very simple, almost like platform and development environment to create new data visualization. So what I wanted to show here is that we have this new checkbox that's not bound to anything. Cool. So that gives you an idea of like how the mechanics of it work. Now I want to talk a little bit about what kind of use cases that could be used for, and why that's kind of interesting and important. So as I said, like Superset plugin that makes Superset essentially almost a data product development platform. In the context of Superset, you can build little data products without writing much backend code. You can tap into Superset data access layer. So there's a lot going on behind the scene in Superset to generate the queries, talk to external databases like Redshift, BigQuery, Snowflake, whatever it might be. Doing that while doing authentication, permissioning, caching, and audit. So that's a lot that the Superset backend does for you if you want to build a little data application, data product. You get all these rich controls at your fingertips. I didn't really show you much here. I showed you the checkbox, but we have all sorts of color pickers and palette pickers and these like metric editors and all sorts of more advanced controls that you might want to use in your visualization, like little sliders, drop downs, and things like that. So those are at your fingerprints. They're really easy to use from the JavaScript console, or from the JavaScript plugin. You can really focus your work on the visualization, the front end work, as opposed to any of the backend code or interacting with data or crafting SQL. And you can bring that visualization that you build inside a dashboard, right? So that means that you could surround, if you were to build, I don't know, let's say if you're at Lyft and you're building a tool to show how a specific ride went, like maybe a ride tool, a ride player that would show a single ride and where the people went and all the events that happen in different geolocation, like where the driver was and where the passenger was. So you could build this little application from within some Superset as a plugin, and bring that into a dashboard where you could surround it with maybe line charts and bar charts and other things that can be complementary, right? So because you're within that platform, you have the full power of everything else that's inside that platform. So we think, and I think that this is really interesting because these plugins now can be published as NPM packages. They can be shared across people. I'm really hoping that we start to see more specialized data visualization plugins show up for Superset, where people can exchange them, so we can have this ecosystem of plugins that people use and share and open source. All right, so the last kind of example and little demo I'm going to cover today is this idea of dynamic charts and dashboard creation. So the common way to go and create a chart or a dashboard in Superset is to simply save it from here, right? You can just go and save this and get back to it. So that's through the UI, and similarly, you can go and create a new dashboard charts in the UI, but you can also do this programmatically. So if you're in dev mode, you can go to this endpoint called Swagger V1 to get a sense of what's in our public REST API. So people at Preset, I've been working pretty hard at building. So we always had this internal private API, but now we've been working on a much more public API so that you can go and do. The goal is like that, so that everything you can do in the UI as a user, you could do programmatically through the REST API. So what I wanted to show today is, so Swagger is this, I believe, documentation framework around REST APIs that allows people to define RESTful APIs in a certain way and document them in a certain way. And then this page can be embedded in your website to show exactly, so it's an interactive documentation tool for your REST API. So here I'm looking at the chart endpoint. So the get chart endpoint is where you would go to get a chart or list a chart. So here it gives you the query object and the structure. And what I was going to do here is try to make it work just by using the Swagger interactive page here. So if I just do an empty query and I click execute, it's going to generate a curl. Like this curl endpoint shows you kind of exactly what it looks like. This is the request URL and what it looks like when encoded. And this is what the response looks like. So the response got all sorts of information about like which columns did we query, what are the labels, kind of metadata around it, and then it has the result that has a collection of charts. So here, this is the first chart here, and this one, I'm going to copy it, and this one is called, it's pointing to the data source energy usage, and the actual name of the chart is multi-line. So I could go and kind of show you just kind of in reality what that looks like as I get back to it. So this is this chart here. It shows first here the same way it shows first in the REST response. So now if I go and click this, you're going to see what this chart looks like. It looks like it's a multi-chart, so it loads kind of two different things. It's pretty busy. Not the best charts that we have in our examples, but that will do. And now that I've copied this, I'm going to go towards our post endpoint here. So this is a chart post endpoint. And I believe I can click try it out. And instead of using, so this shows me the schema for it, I can just paste my what I copied from the get endpoint now. And I wanted to change the name. So here, I'm going to call it again something. Hello Airflow. Hello Airflow. And I believe I can just run this. And I got the answer that I got. Looks like it was a bad request. So I think I did something wrong here. Maybe, let's see, what did I do wrong? That looked good to me. Well, the demo gods are not always with us. Like there's probably an error somewhere in my post here for the JSON. I'll try it again. Maybe I just got lucky when I did that last time. Oh no, I think actually it says chart added here. This is the list of the answers I might get. Actually, this is from the documentation. So I think that I have gotten an answer. So it's just me not being good at swagging with Swagger. No, it did not get created. So something happened. I could be debugging it, but it shows you the mechanics of how this all works, right? So you can essentially come here, see the documentation for the REST API, see how it all works, try it out, and I can help you kind of shape your kind of your client or your script that you're going to run to be able to do this. I think I'm not going to fight with it here. I tried that once yesterday and it worked. I'm not sure why it's not working here. Failed to decode the JSON object, so there's a bad delimiter here. Maybe someone in the question can point to me as what I did wrong here, but I will pass on it for now and get back to my slides. So I think, let's see, we're getting closer to the end of this presentation. We're 30 minutes in, so I think the timing is pretty good. I wanted to show this other way too. So another pointer is another alternate way to create charts and dashboard. That is the improper, not recommended way to do it, because it is more of the private API, right? So that would be using the SQL Alchemy models to do it. It's not recommended to do that as it's not guaranteed that it will work in future version, right? So it's going to use at your own risk, but I'll give the pointer to people in case people are interested. On our GitHub, there is the examples that we load. So when you first install Superset, you can run a command that's called Superset load examples. It will load a collection of examples. And the code that does load the example is viable, and it's part of the Superset package. So this dashboard called birth names that we looked at before is loaded by this script here. So it's pretty easy to go and reverse engineer how we load the data into the database, and how we create a certain set of metrics and slices, which are the internal name for chart. So here you can see that we create a certain number of charts in an array, using some defaults, using some configuration as to like what is the from and what is the time filtering, what are the metrics, what are the dimensions that we want to show. And in the end, we create the actual dashboard for it, which is a collection of these charts with positional elements to it. So that's something that you might want to consider too if you're interested in building charts dynamically. And if, like for me, the REST API didn't work for you. So that covers most of the material I wanted to cover. The last slide is about the fact that we're hiring. So the team at Preset is growing. We're about 25 people, and we're looking to grow pretty fast. So and probably looking to hire our first data engineer. We have mostly people working on like web development, web application, front end, back end, cloud infrastructure. But we're also looking for people for at least one or two data engineers in the next few months or so. So please reach out. And to that, I will hand it back over to Sumit with the Q&A section.
Awesome, awesome. This the superset looks pretty slick and interesting, and I have actually we got a couple of questions, so we'll try to cover them. And just a reminder, if you have any questions, like for the audience, if you have any questions which is like unanswered or caught up a little late, right? Then you can always ask into the Slack channel, and we'll try to answer that there as well. Um, okay, so the first question we take is like, uh, so what would be the minimum system requirements to deploy it and test some of these features?
Um, so that's a fairly hard question to answer, but Superset is a simple web application with the possibility of using some async workers, though that's optional. So if you just want to test Superset, you can do that very easily on a small machine. Like you don't really need to have um, a very uh, like an array of machine. It's not a distributed system, right? Superset is mostly just the consumption layer, and really does all the heavy lifting in your data warehouse or the source database that you're using. So it's really just all you need is to set up essentially, a web server type of machine. And if you have a lot of users, like the bigger installations, you can scale it out and have multiple web server machine, put a load balancer in front of them. But generally, Superset doesn't take a lot of resources because the database that's behind it does the work.
Okay, great. So the next question is about the SQL variant that used here. Is it that ANSI SQL?
Yes. Yeah. So let's talk about this a little bit. So we have like technical people that know databases on the line. So I think that's going to be interesting. So first thing is in SQL Lab, you write your SQL and we pass it to the database driver as it is, and we don't need to do too much. That we'll just pass the SQL along and get the response. So we're kind of SQL dialect agnostic for SQL Lab itself. Now for the Explore view, which is the slice and dice part where you pick your metrics, you pick your dimension, you apply your filters. What we do is we use a library called SQL Alchemy that probably many of you are, if you're dealing with Airflow, you're probably familiar with it. So it's a SQL toolkit plus an ORM on top, right? And the SQL toolkit layer of SQL Alchemy speaks many dialects, and it's pretty easy actually to write your own dialect. So if you, it's actually the case that some of my colleagues and Beto, while at Lyft, I think wrote some of the SQL dialects for things like Druid and for the Google spreadsheet integration that we did. So that's one of the way that Superset knows how to speak SQL. Now there are things that SQL Alchemy does not know about. So it knows about dialect type things. So that means it knows how to quote strings. It knows whether to say limit or to say row num or top, depending on the dialect that you use. But it doesn't know all the date functions, and right, like the date function, date truncation function, date subtraction addition function. So we have a layer inside Superset that it's a module or package called DB Engine Specs, so which for everything that is database engine specific, um, and that deals with putting all the databases at the same level. So this the short answer, that was a long answer. The short answer is if there is a SQL Alchemy dialect for the database that you want to use, most likely Superset can talk to that database, and we support a lot of databases. And it's pretty easy to go and write your own dialect if needed. That makes it such a you don't have to write it. Someone else probably did it because it's easy.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, so the next question is uh, about the superset operator for Airflow. So is it already exist, or if not, then people are asking like, is there any chance to contribute one?
Yes, I think I might have I've written some in the past, and superset operators. You have to think about like what you want Airflow to get superset to do, right? So one thing that I talked about today is you might want Airflow to tell superset to create charts. So that's an option. Which in which case pretty easy to just kind of post to the REST API. But one thing that we've done, I think that I should have had in my talk, but that's good that someone is asking the question now, because that's a point of integration that's very common between the two that we add at both Airbnb and Lyft, which is warming up the cache. So when you write a pipeline, so let's say you have a pipeline that loads up a table with rides information at Lyft, and that's a table that's used in a lot of dashboards and charts. Superset as a caching engine, I did not talk about that today, but it knows how to cache the JSON payload that is behind each chart. So if you load a dashboard with 100 charts, behind the scene, we cache 100 little JSON payloads with the data behind the chart, so that when 100 people load that dashboard, we don't hit the database too much, right? We just hit the cache instead. So there is an endpoint in Superset that you can say, you can call Superset and say, I just refreshed this table, the rights table, go and refresh the cache for all the charts and dashboards that use this table, so that the cache is always hot, and that Airflow can kind of tell at which time to go and process that cache, as opposed to having something like the cache expiring, and sometimes you hit or miss whether the data has been loaded or not loaded yet. That can get a little tricky. So I would highly recommend, so if you're building Superset dashboard on top of Airflow tables loaded by Airflow, it's really easy to call that endpoint. That's probably the reason why we don't have the operator. You just call it an endpoint that says, here's my table name. And I'll try to dig out the endpoint and share it in the notes.
Okay. Sorry, I think my screen looks frozen.
What is
Can you hear me, Max? Okay, I think
Yeah,
I'm back.
I'm here.
Okay, got it. Great. So we can take maybe one or two questions more. So would it be and there would be some features like data source extract
An
in
extract,
Superset?
is it in the sense of like a Tableau extract or something like that?
It seems like that, yeah.
Yeah, so we made the very conscious decision with Superset to not get into the data, the heavy kind of data compute, database kind of data storage game. Superset is really in the consumption layer, and I think that's a good thing. So people nowadays make huge investments into their data warehouse, right? So you probably the company you work at probably has made a huge investment in something like who knows, Presto, Snowflake, Hive, Druid, Redshift, like whatever it may be. And you have a big contract and you run this big database, and you don't want to, that's something that, you store all your data into your lake, then you store all your data into Redshift, then you store all your data into something like Druid, then you store all your data, the same data again in a Tableau extract. And 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 that introduces kind of latency, ETL, things that can go wrong, things that can be delayed. So we would much rather kind of not store data inside the superset layer and leave that to the data warehouse instead, which is typically what we do, what we recommend to do. And these data warehouses typically do much better than the Tableau extract can do, right? A database like Druid can have billions and billions of rows and scan them under a second, where, at some point with the Tableau extract, and in my own experience, that is a little bit dated with Tableau. When you get into the 100 millions of rows, things typically get a little hard. You have to deal with servers and this sort of thing. So there we much rather, hit your fast cache, whatever it is, whether it's a Redshift or a Druid or a Snowflake nowadays.
Okay, sounds great. And I think the last question that it is a web server based system, so it should be able to host it on Kubernetes.
Completely, yeah. There are Elm charts around, and we provide a Docker within our repository. I think we store one, we compute one at preset. So if you look at the Docker Hub for preset, you'll find our Docker. There is a Helm chart, I believe, in the main I think we have one in our repo now. So we have, I think the best Elm charting you can find is going to be in the Superset repo. And I know there's one in the Helm slash charts repo, which is the central one with all the popular, the most popular ones. It's really easy to get going with that. And then at some point, if you have a larger install base, you have to get a little bit deeper under the cover. But Superset is fairly simple as compared to Airflow. It's just collection of web servers. We have a metadata database too. We have these async workers with Celery, so it should sound pretty familiar to the Airflow crowd, actually.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, we are out of the time. So thanks a lot, Max, for having this awesome session. And for the audience, a quick note: if you have any unanswered questions, please use the Slack channel, and do not forget to check the virtual swag bag at airflowsummit.org/swag. And lastly, if you wanted to revisit any of these talks, it will be available into the crowdcast itself. Just go and check out the recordings. And yeah, in 15 minutes, we're gonna have awesome talk. The next talk will be by QP, and he's gonna talk about the how teaching an old and new tricks, and that's gonna be into 15 minutes. So it will be available in the same link where you are, right? So you can just have a grab a tea, coffee, and then yeah, see you in 15 minutes. And thanks again, Max.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. It's a pleasure.